The opinions expressed on this program represent the viewpoints of individual authors or contributors and do not necessarily reflect those of Troy University.
Hello and welcome to EconVersations. I'm your host, Dr. Dan Sutter of the Johnson Center for Political Economy at Troy University. Last November, India did something rather remarkable. They canceled the two largest denominations of their currency, the rupee, and then replaced them with two new bills. The money people were holding was simply declared no longer good. What's involved with such a demonetization, and what goals was this trying to accomplish? And have they been successful? What have been the effects? Is this part of a trend toward a cashless world? And are there any lessons for money and the evolution of monetary payments for here in the United States and elsewhere across the globe? Joining me on EconVersations today to explain these strange goings-on and some of the lessons is my colleagues from the Johnson Center, Dr. G.P. Manish. Welcome back to the show, G.P.
Hey, Dan. Nice to be with you again.
Now, in this case, this wasn't just an issue that you were studying for you, that we were studying from a standpoint of monetary economics, because you're also originally from India and have a family that's still there, right?
Yes, absolutely. I'm from there. My wife's from there. So but I was very interested in what's going on with this because it's quite a remarkable, like you said, it's quite a remarkable episode.
So let's get into some of the details here first, just so people can understand what actually happened, and then we can try and get into some of the meaning or with the larger implications of this. So what exactly did happen in this?
Well, what happened was overnight, on November 8th, the Prime Minister literally announced unilaterally that two bills, that is the 500 rupee and the 1,000 rupee bills, will no longer be legal tender, next day onwards. And so it was done with barely any notice. So it was done completely. No one knew about it. Nobody in the public at large. In fact, nobody even in the legislature, or in fact, not even cabinet ministers knew about it. It was literally done from the office of the Prime Minister. And so it was completely like what you would call a monetary shock that just came out of the blue, right? Nobody had any expectations this was going to happen, and then overnight, bam, two of these notes go out of circulation, and they account for 86% of the cash in circulation in India at the time.
Well, okay. And so, I mean, in India, the Prime Minister just has this authority, can do something like that?
Apparently, yes, and it would be like, India has the parliamentary, the Westminster system, so, and our constitution is structured slightly differently from the U.S. constitution. So yes, they do have the power, but as you can see, that's a lot of power to have, to just be able to, just merely with a stroke of a pen, literally remove 86% of the cash from circulation.
And so here's the Prime Minister, and so other than possibly just wanting to get the money for himself, but he's not even getting the money for himself because it's just declared null and void.
Right.
I mean, what was the purpose? Was there any purpose behind this?
Well, the purpose was one of rooting out corruption. So the goal was to get rid of what is called black money, and black money really is money on which one or other form of tax has been evaded. So it could be the income tax, it could be various indirect taxes, etc. And it's assumed, or it was assumed, that this therefore implies that it's been a result of some illegal or nefarious activities, and that a large proportion of this was held in cash. And in these two denominations, because these being, like you said, the highest denominations of Indian currency. So if you do this as a shock doctrine, almost like overnight, nobody knows, catch the bad guys off guard, they won't be able to reconvert this cash in a legal fashion, and so you'd get rid, or you would throw a spanner in the works of all this illegal activity.
So speaking of illegal activity, and so in India, let's talk about this. They have a significant amount of black markets in India, right?
So this is the point that one needs to be careful about. What is illegal, right? I mean, so again, black money is any money on which taxes have been evaded.
Okay.
But taxes can be evaded for a number of reasons. So yes, some of this money, so this sort of black money pools together money that sort of is used to finance outright illegal activity, such as, say, terrorist networks. right, or other criminals, right, who want to stay outside the sort of legal system.
Right.
But in a country like India, we have lots of markets that are firstly what you would call informal markets. They're not illegal, but they just happen to work outside the formal legal system in that sense. But also you have lots of people who evade taxes which are just onerous and regulations which are just, you have so many regulations and so many different taxes that lots of this money that is withheld is just cash transactions that are done so that you can avoid some form of regulation or some form of taxation. So to call that illegal, it is illegal in a sense, but is that a result of people, doing things that otherwise would not be done or would be illegal in from a sort of universal standpoint, or is that only because this regulations and taxes were so onerous that they were forced to sort of go into a black market activity?
So when you talk about onerous taxes, so would these be both like taxes on commodities like say alcohol or other things
all sorts
directly?
of, but even things like real estate transactions.
Okay.
The stamp duty. That's one of the big indirect taxes on real estate transactions, and lots of people try to evade that. But it's even things like businessmen avoiding all sorts of. So in India, you still have very different levels of, say, octroi, or sort of, you have to pay taxes to cross state lines. A whole host of such indirect taxes, a whole host of regulations. You might have, be forced to procure your raw materials from one source rather than the other source, and all sorts of regulations that you try to get around. And really, this is all a legacy of the socialist days. And so India, while it has liberalized, it has not got rid of all of these sort of, and these regulations don't really make much sense. They're just put in place to control private activity, because that was the objective during the days of socialism. So a lot of this is just a legacy of that. And so in many ways, economic activity in India goes on because people can evade, have the ability to sort of evade some of this stuff. If everybody had to follow every rule, I think most economic activity in an economy like India would grind to a halt.
Now, for someone here in the United States trying to make sense of or put a perspective on what was happening there in India, one analogy or one thing we might have is that over the last decade or so, the United States has introduced new redesigned bills for much of our currency, and I guess there was some argument that was related to illegal drug trade in the United States, or wanting to change over the currency. So is that a reasonable analogy of what might have happened to some extent?
That was one of the goals. So that's to some extent, yes. But so in India also, we wanted one of the goals was to get around easy counterfeiting, which it's alleged happens. Largely funded by terrorist organizations operating out of Pakistan, which is India's neighbor, and it's part of the the long-time conflict that's been going on between these two countries. But yes, there's also the added element of just, I think, the scale of what is largely which people recognize as this sort of black money and sort of tax evaded income floating around is a lot more than just what would be accounted for by the illegal drug trade in America. So it wouldn't be comparable on scale, but yes, largely on principle to some extent.
And then the other thing that seemed to be involved with this was, since it's thought that the people who were engaged in the nefarious or at least tax avoiding activities were holding a lot of the cash by canceling the money that they were holding, it was in effect almost like a tax or confiscation of their ill-gotten gains from that perspective. And so then, in the United States, we have asset forfeiture. So would that be another way to possibly think about what was happening there?
Potentially, except that this wasn't done by, say, cops who stop you for some other purpose and then find that, well, you happen to have some, assets that are linked to some drug activity. It would just be like you have you have stocks of this cash at your home, and then overnight you find out you can't use them, right? But yes, the presumption was, and you're correct, that it would transfer some resources from this black market, all this illegal money would be transferred from these individuals over to the government, because essentially if they cannot exchange that money back into the new denomination bills, then that amount of money would then be available for the government to print
Okay.
out of thin air.
Ooh, yeah, we'll get into that.
Okay, sure.
That's going to be a complicated part of the
Yes.
story, but we'll get into that. So, but let's focus then. Like, okay, November 8th comes along,
Yes.
they make this surprise announcement.
Right.
A lot of people in India actually use cash as well as just
yes.
smugglers or
Oh, no.
tax evaders, right?
India has the highest cash transaction rate in the world. Up to 95% of all transactions are made in cash in India. That's some estimates. Definitely above 90%. Almost 60% of individuals don't own a bank account, right? Or something close to that, about more than 50%.
Right.
Between 50 and 60%. So you can see that so this is 86% of the cash in circulation in an economy where more than 90% of transactions are made in cash.
Yeah.
So that's a significant, as part of economic activity. It's not like, say, demonetizing the $100 bill here, right? It wouldn't be, the $100 bill does not account for that amount, that much transaction activity here. But in India, the scale is vast.
So there's a lot of hardship on just average Indians who maybe hadn't really evaded a lot of taxes, or certainly weren't
Yes.
getting rich from evading taxes.
Because what the government did was they gave 50 days period in which you had to convert your old demonetized bills into new bills. And you could do that through a variety of means, through the post office, but most importantly through banks.
Okay.
So you could deposit cash and get cash back, or you could deposit cash into your account and then use the ATM to get new bills. But the problem was, and this is where it gets, quite ridiculous, was the ATM machines were not configured for the new notes.
Okay.
So that one of the features of the new 2,000 rupee note was that it would be wider than the old notes. But the old ATM machines couldn't accommodate the new note. With the result, and add to that the fact that the supply of new notes was far less than the demand for them. So basically, what happened was that they had to keep imposing new limits on how much you could convert of your old money into new money. And the result was, long lines, basically, like you see here, complete chaos that affected the lives of most people.
So people simply couldn't even get access to
Right,
cash
they couldn't convert.
to then go to the store and buy, because as you're mentioning, most of them don't even have bank accounts to begin with.
Right.
And they have to somehow get the new currency.
Well, yes, and theoretically, if the new currency had been smoothly, replaced, or the old had been smoothly replaced with the new, then it's fine. It wouldn't matter that much, but it wasn't done. And of course, the impact was differential, right? So those people who had a greater proportion of their wealth stored in cash were affected more than others who had more of their money in the banks to begin with. And that means in India, the rural part of India, the poorer sections of society, people who earn a lot of their income from daily wage labor, these were the people who were affected the most. So they woke up one day and they found that, a significant proportion of their meager wealth was gone.
Right.
And then they had to go stand in line to get the new money, in which case they're giving up, their only source of livelihood. They don't have the sort of, cushion to do that. They live day to day, literally meal to meal. And then on top of that, they weren't getting paid by their employers because these are the people who were largely involved in the cash economy. And so all of these transactions were literally, thrown out of whack. And so the impact was disproportionately on these segments of society, which is the vast majority, while it was much less felt by the urban, the middle and the upper middle class and the richer sections of society.
And so it wasn't just people, the average people, but many businesses were being impacted as well, right?
Yes, especially businesses in what is called the informal sector of the economy, as I just mentioned. Agriculture, of course, which is largely cash-driven in India still. And this informal sector, which largely comprises of small enterprises, the sort of picture of India that most people have when you walk into an Indian street, you see hawkers, you see peddlers, you see guys with small shops. Well, this is the informal economy you're talking about, as compared to the big corporations, like the Tatas and the Mahindras and others. And these people's lives were completely blown apart by this, sort of overnight confiscation of their wealth.
So we didn't just see a demonetization. There also was a sort of remonetization with new bills being issued.
Right.
And there were people's existing rupees, their 101, was it 500 and 1,000 rupee bills were not actually void. They had some rules by which they could convert them over and get credit for them, but there was still some owners. So we had this new monetization remonetization going on. So explain a little bit what that is involved.
Well, like you mentioned before, the idea behind this move was, on the one hand, to completely confiscate the wealth that is held, this black money, because taxes have been evaded. If they have to convert the old notes into new notes, they would have to come to a bank or a post office. They'd have to declare that income, and then they'd get caught. And then the assumption was most of those people would not do that.
Okay.
And the government estimated a certain significant amount of black money that is held in cash, and as a result, one of the side effects of this, as I mentioned before, was that some part of the cash in circulation would completely just leave the economy, right? And so that amount of money could be replaced by the government. But I should mention that it was a complete failure. That literally almost all the notes came back. So that means that, on the one hand, the estimations of the government as to how much of the money, which was black money, was actually held in cash, was over-exaggerated.
Again?
It so happens that barely 6 to 10% of this black money is actually held in cash, because obviously these guys are smarter than that. They don't just sit on cash. They convert it quickly into gold, into jewelry, into real estate, into cars, luxury apartments, and things of that nature.
Okay.
And so they'd already done that. They didn't really have much cash. And this other thing is, whatever cash did exist, the second point, a lot of that was literally made white. Through all sorts of means.
Right.
It could be opening, bank accounts under fake names, right? So I don't know, like some guy's buddy who doesn't have black money, he opens an account.
Yeah.
Or the guy's assistant or something, he opens an account. This guy gives him money, makes it white, right?
Yeah.
Or there are stories of bank clerks being coerced into accepting this money because maybe these people are politically connected. They have a way to use back channels. So literally, the government got none of. It was a complete failure as far as affecting the black money economy was concerned.
So the remonetization is into a point you hinted at earlier. The remonetization and the cancellation of the previous money is going to have some real effects in the economy.
Yep.
And this is related to a point that arises in monetary theory. When new money, when money is getting created all together. It's a point we sometimes gloss over, but it's an important one. And let's try to get into this. So as money gets created in an economy, it actually has some effects.
Yes, money has real effects. Or in other words, when the money supply changes, it actually affects which goods get produced, how much of those goods get produced, who gets employed, who gets the wage hikes first, et cetera, et cetera. And usually the earlier you receive the money, or the first spenders have an advantage, simply because they get the money when the rest of the prices in the economy are still at the old level. So you have this, so it's like you have this new cash, right? It's almost like, imagine if somebody gave you a $1,000 gift right now. You have this $1,000 extra, which came from nowhere, literally. Prices are what they were. But as you start spending this money, prices start rising. So those who receive this money later in the sequence in which this cash moves from hand to hand, they get less of an advantage because now they get the money, but the prices have already gone up.
And sometimes it's not literally, generally speaking, the money supply isn't increased by running the printing presses of a nation.
Yeah.
But that's one way it's probably more convenient to think about it. And one of the first groups to get to spend money often as it gets created would be the government.
Yes,
right?
and this was, again, assuming that their estimations were true. So yeah, I don't know I don't know the exact numbers, but assume India's total cash in circulation was like $200 billion, equivalent of $200 billion, and assume that out of that, say $40 billion happened to be this so-called black money held in cash. And let's assume that all these $40 billion didn't come back, right? So these guys got scared. They didn't bring the cash back to the banks and make it, try to make it white in any way, or launder it in any way. Well, all that $40 billion of cash is gone. So now, when the government is printing out the new notes, they get that to print out that $40 billion, right? And they get to spend it. And they're not handing it out to private citizens who then spend it. They themselves get to decide how to spend it. And so they get that first advantage. It so happened that didn't really work out because these guys were too smart. They laundered the money, and they didn't hold much in cash to begin with.
This has also been, India's demonetization has also been discussed with regard to the possible move to a cashless economy or trying to increase the amount of electronic transactions that occur in an economy.
Yes.
So, and this has raised some issues about some costs of having cash or costs of cash to an economy. What would be the costs to an economy of having cash?
Well, I mean, the biggest cost now, one of the costs which was mentioned earlier was that, well, you would use something like gold or silver, but that would have other uses. We don't have that now because we have paper, which is largely worthless for other purposes. But other costs such as the fact that you actually have to hold it, right? You have to actually carry notes. Other than the convenience of using a debit card comes from that, in that you can just swipe your card. You just have to hold one card. And you can pay how much ever you want. You have a credit card, you can make a $5,000 transaction just with the card, as compared to actually carrying $5,000 worth of currency.
Right.
So that's the biggest cost on individuals.
And there's got to be some greater security with financial, electronic banking relative to somebody gets money
mugged
stolen
or it's pickpocketed, etc. Plus, the government likes electronic transactions more simply because they leave a trail, and so therefore it's harder to evade taxes on transactions made, electronically. So tax revenue presumably would be higher if larger proportion of transactions were made electronically as compared to in cash.
So there are a lot of attractions to being able to use credit cards, electronic funds, but there are also costs as well, right? We don't necessarily see it when we use credit cards ourselves, but that's actually costly for a store to let us use a credit card.
Yes, I mean the merchant has to pay a certain fee. Of course, all the equipment has to be put in place to actually manufacture the service on the part of the bank. Put all the electronic, and then the bank has to exist. They have to have people who run the back office. They have to have branches in most cases, all of that.
Well, most people have to have a bank account, which would be significant in India since most people don't have.
Yes, they don't have a bank account largely because lots of the documents that are required to open one they might not have. Lots of them are illiterate; they don't know how to write or read, so they don't really know what to do. And a lot of them, even if they had it, it's also a question to some extent of habit. I mean, cash gives a sort of security to people that the money is there with them. You have to trust your banker.
Yeah. Now, if there are some advantages to cash and some advantages of electronic funds transfers and the electronic banking, is there any reason to suspect that individuals and businesses and financial institutions wouldn't be able to reach some kind of a balance on this on their own? I mean, why does there need to be a government policy, or does there need to be a government policy?
I would argue there doesn't need to be one. I mean, if you just take the case, for example, of another technology which has revolutionized India in the last 20 years, which is that of cell phones. Right. So when I was growing up, most people still had landlines. This is about it's only starting about 2000, the year 2000 onwards that cell phones really began to make an impact in India, and we found that everybody used them, even the poorest of the poor, even people who were, otherwise maybe had a hard time sort of, getting access to lots of other sort of goods. The hawkers and peddlers, etc., would have like a cell phone number written on the side of their cart. So it's not as if now that it's pretty clear that the whole purpose of fighting corruption was just useless. That the step needn't have been taken at all, and it was misconceived to begin with. The new logic is, the new rationale is this: that we needed this to push India into like a new digital phase where people would adopt these sort of electronic, would embrace all of this new technology. Well, the fact is, Indians, even poor Indians, who people might think would have a hard time accessing the information required to process new technology, in the past have adopted complex technology like cell phones and even smartphones. Yeah. Right. So there's nothing that makes one think that they would suddenly change and that they would not adopt, say, the technology that comes with the convenience which comes with banking, or even mobile wallets, which are very prevalent in India now. But the rationale now for those who support this policy is to say, well, we needed to do this because otherwise these people would, are just so mired in their old habits, and they don't, they'll never have the information to make this change. So our great prime minister had to come in and, wave his magic wand and therefore, change people's minds.
Well, and this actually gets to a bigger issue in terms of control of payments or the payment system or the money system. And that is that money evolved as a means to allow people to undertake transactions before governments ever got involved with that. Yes. Money's an example of what's known as a spontaneous order, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So, and to some extent, these types of intrusions into the means of payment are contradicting the spontaneous order, right?
Absolutely, and even if in the case of India, one of the reasons why the government wants a larger, cashless economy is to boost tax revenue. Right, and one can ask oneself that a government that made the kind of mess that it made implementing this policy of demonetization. Do you want to fund more, of an institution like that, right? So lots of the times the actual reasons for doing some things are to benefit the state, and like you said, to throw a spanner in the works of the workings of what we would call the spontaneous order of the market.
And so just to be clear, I mean, people evolved ways to trade before the government came in and took over and created these fiat currencies or government currencies, right? And to some extent, we're seeing, as a reminder of the fact that the government now runs the currency system, even though it doesn't have to necessarily.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, money didn't just come about because one day some prince, woke up in the morning and said, wow, we should all, use money instead of bartering goods in exchange for one another. It evolved through a process in the market where people chose more marketable goods than less marketable goods in order to use them as mediums of exchange or media of exchange, because you hold money not to consume or produce but to give away in further exchange. So it makes sense for you to move out of the good you have into a more marketable good, and that's a spontaneous process which doesn't need centralization.
And to the extent that governments meddle more in their money, I mean, it might actually be creating a role for something like Bitcoin, right?
Yes, that is true. It might create uncertainty. If the government can do this, what will it do next? Which node will it demonetize next? Will they, what new step will they take? And maybe one could see a trend of people switching towards, some of these alternative currencies as well.
A currency that would be beyond the control of governments.
Yes.
Well, thanks very much for coming on and talking about this. I know it was a headline-grabbing event from last fall. Maybe got overshadowed because of our election, but it was an important issue for us to try and explain about and understand a little bit more. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Dan.
And thanks for joining us. Join us again next time for another EconVersations.